How's John?
Hey, Terry.
Good
How
and
you
you?
doing? Good, thank
Oh,
you.
well, very good.
How's the missus? Is she getting better?
Yeah, she had a big MRI scan yesterday and we're now waiting for the result.
The results. So, man.
We carry on.
Yeah, you have to, eh? So, otherwise, you've been kept busy.
Yeah, I'm busy doing all my preparations for Aliyah.
Ah, okay. Okay.
So
So
today
what are
I
you
hand
gonna go as soon as it opens up?
well, it's already people are going now all during this.
You're right, yeah. The Aliyah. I've actually got a nephew that left about just over a month ago.
Yeah,
And yeah, he settled in nicely, and yeah,
where's he gone to?
I think they're in Granana.
Ranana Fontaine.
So yeah, the first 2 weeks they obviously in isolation. They were put up at a very nice hotel. So he said that was very nice. And listen, he's in the honeymoon stage at the moment. So at the moment it's very nice, but we'll see when things settle down a bit. But the early signs are he's loving it.
Yeah. What age is he?
He's about 45.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi.
Yeah, just struggling to get the text on. That's our slight delay, but let me just see why it's not coming on the share screen. Hello, 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 everybody. Just trying to get
Rabbi. Can you hear us?
hello. I hear everybody.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hello.
Oh, well, thank you.
Just struggling to give you your text, but I'm sure we'll get it right. Everything else is in order. Rambam 1 chapter a day. Yeah, here we go. I've got it. Okay, is the text coming up? Can you see it?
Yes, yes, yes.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, I don't know why it was deluding me for a bit. Maybe the computer was playing magic tricks with me because that's today's subject. It's all about magic. So welcome, welcome. Broadcasting today live from Hurlingham. That's just west of Sandton and Hyde Park in Johannesburg. So welcome to everybody. And we are doing chapter 11. That is the 11th perek of Avodas Kechavim, the laws of idolatry. The good news is this section is completed tomorrow. So well done to all of you who have been on this boat for the last 12 days, even more so from the beginning, because what's tomorrow? Wednesday. From Thursday, a new section will be done. Now, what we're talking about over here is magic, the real thing, and the Torah's problem, the Torah's situation with sorcery, divination, and the reasons why we don't get involved in it. So let's read a little bit inside. I'm going to do a bit of Hebrew text, as we always do, to start off with, where that aleph is on the right-hand side, or if you prefer English, you can look where it says 1. We may not follow the statutes of the idolaters, and we don't resemble them. Not in their style of dress, not in their hairstyles, or anything similar. And this is all based on the verse in Leviticus, Shenemar, as it says in Leviticus, do not follow the statutes of the nation that I'm driving out in front of you. And similarly, it also says, you should not follow their statutes. And furthermore, third verse, you should be careful lest you inquire after them. So over here you see the Maimonides, the Rambam brings various different verses. And then he says, what are we talking about? Are we talking about not following them in their technology, their science, their geography? We're talking here about not following them in their sorcery and witchcraft, divination. And so he says, Akol be'inyan echad hu mazhir. On the English side, that's where we move over to the second paragraph. So I am sending the text a bit higher. All these verses share a single theme, that we should not so-called make our appearance exactly as theirs. And in this way, we show that we are distinct in our character, in our ideology. The Jews should be different from them. And we should be known by our garments and attire, and our actions, in the same way as our character and ideology is different from them. And I'm going to move to the English side, that paragraph at the bottom. Thus, one may not wear a garment which is unique to them or grow the tresses of our hair as they do. We may not shave our heads from the sides and leave hair in the center as they do. This is a hairstyle called belorit. We may not shave the hair on the front of our faces from ear to ear, leaving a growth at the back of our heads. So all kinds of restrictions on making our appearance too similar to those of the nations of the land that we're entering into. And this is a protection in order to remember and remind ourselves that we are not going to be involved in their witchcraft and divination that they are involved in. And whoever performs one of the above or a deed of this nature is liable for malchus, for lashes. So that halacha ends off with the punishment. Now, what happens if you go to a birthday party and there's a magician there? If we're talking about not doing magic over here, so we'll find that out during this perek, during this chapter that we're learning, what is the difference between so-called the real magic, or even magic that isn't real, but the Torah prohibits it and forbids it because of the style at which it's being done and performed, as opposed to so-called the entertaining stuff that we are familiar with, either at a children's birthday party, or there's also magicians that are skilled at entertaining adults at functions, and what the difference is between the two and why one is permitted according to halacha. So don't worry about it, and one is definitely not permitted. In number 2, back to the concept of appearances. When a Jew is cutting the hair of an idolater, he must stop when he approaches within 3 finger breadths of the belorit on all sides. And basically the concept over here is that these were hairstyles that were done specifically in order to blend in and synchronize with various ritualistic services. But in halacha number 3, the Rambam says an interesting thing. If a Jew has an important position in a Gentile kingdom and must sit before the kings, and he would be embarrassed if he did not resemble them, then he's granted permission to wear clothes which resemble theirs and shave the hair on his face as they do. So this is a very unique situation, that generally a person should not look as they do, and especially at that time, that day and age, when they had very unique hair shavings, which were related directly not just to fashion, but to the way in which they served their deities. But here he is able to do it because he's expected to in terms of his position. And the commentators on these halachas explain that it's because his purpose in being there is not to be involved in their rituals. His purpose in being there is rather to be involved in things which are for the benefit of the Jewish people. Now, number 4 is very interesting, because sometimes we find ourselves at a traffic light, at a robot, or a stop street, and there's some guy giving you a pamphlet. I think we've mentioned this before, and it says a bunch of gobbledygook on there, and one of the things it says is that if you pay a particular sorcerer or magician or whatever it is, or some kind of, I don't know what, priest who divines and whatever, he can sort out all of the major crises and issues in our lives in some kind of funny way. And also, the concept of trying to figure out what's going to happen next. So halacha number 4 telling us that it's forbidden to practice soothsaying as idolaters do. And if you look on the right side at the pasuk, it says loy senachashu, second line, ein menachashin ka'akum, we do not practice soothsaying like the non-Jews do. Shenamar, as it says, loy senachashu, you should not practice soothsaying. Now, what does it mean, soothsaying? For example, I'm reading the second paragraph under 4. Those who say, since my piece of bread fell out of my mouth this morning or my staff fell from my hand, I'm not going to travel to this place today. If I'd go there, I would be unable to accomplish what I want. Since a fox passed on my right side, I'm not going to go out the door. I may meet a deceiver. So, all those kind of things where we try to imagine to ourselves that maybe there is or there are reasons, signs that have been given to us that would indicate that we should be careful of certain activities. So those are so-called fictitious superstitions, and it's worse than that. We should not get involved with them. Similarly, a person who sets up omens for himself, for example, if this and this happens, I will do this. If that and that happens, I'll do that. Halacha says, no, with the Jew, we don't do that. We don't create so-called superstitious signs that might act as indications of whether we should be behaving this way or that way. It's not allowed. And quite fascinating, at the end of the fourth halacha, Maimonides notes the story of Eliezer, Abraham's servant. Now, you may be familiar with that story, that Eliezer went looking for a wife for Yitzchak, for Isaac, for Abraham's precious and only son, Yitzchak. And he went looking for a wife for Yitzchak, and he comes to the well, and he prays to God, and he says, if a young maiden comes to the well, and if she's a kind girl and indicates this by offering me water for myself and for my animals, then I will know that this is the girl that you have chosen for Yitzchak. And he was successful, and Hashem miraculously sent Rivka to the well at that moment, Rebecca, as they say in English, and that was the way in which Eliezer found her. So he was allowed to do it in that circumstance, but the Rambam actually mentions it as an example of what you and I should not do. We shouldn't say that if I walk out my house at 1 o'clock today and there's a guy over there offering, how would you call it, a wonderful investment for my savings, that I should think that that's a good thing to do because it happened at 1 when the clouds were over me at a 90-degree angle. No way. That is not a way in which we should behave or could behave. Number 5. But a different ruling applies if a person says, this dwelling I built will be a good omen for me. The woman I married or the animal that I purchased is blessed. From the time I purchased it, I have become rich. So interestingly, you may not use it as an indicator of the future, but to be able to say that you feel that something brought bracha, blessing, into your life. If we want to feel and acknowledge that Hashem may have given us a bracha, well, I might say that since I've moved into my new home and my new place, I feel blessing. Nothing wrong with that at all. That's not called divining. Second paragraph, the same applies to a person who rejoices and says, this is a good omen. When he asks a child, which verse are you studying? And the child reads him a verse of blessing. This and similar to this are permitted, since the person is not performing an act or holding himself back from performing an act because of the omen. All he did was consider that something that already happened was is a good sign. So we see the difference. Not to govern one's behavior based on some kind of fictitious sign, but if you want to say that because of the sign you just feel, you're not doing anything, that it's a good situation, nothing wrong with that. Also to mention, in the days of old, this was quite a common custom, that sometimes people would meet a child, coming out of the house of study, coming out of the cheder, and they'd say to the little fellow, what did you learn today? And the child would say, I think the expression was psikli psukhal, give me your verse. What verse were you learning with your teacher today? And when the child would recite a particular verse, so then the one asking would see some relevance, some lesson and blessing in that particular verse that the child offers, and this is acceptable. This is not a problem. Second second line, number 6. I jumped a bit. What is meant by a diviner? This refers to a person who performs deeds to cause him to fall into a trance and have his mind cleared of all thoughts until he can predict the future, saying, this will happen or this won't happen. It is improper to do this. Be careful to do so. There's some diviners who use sand or stones. Others prostrate themselves on the ground, make strange motions and scream. Whichever they are, they look at a metal or crystal mirror, fantasize, speak. Others carry a staff, lean on a tap. So he's listing all different mechanisms that people use. And this is what the prophet Hosea meant when he said, my people will inquire of their rods, their staffs will tell them. All of this is not allowed. Halacha number 7 continues, it is forbidden to divine or to inquire of a diviner. A person who inquires of a diviner is given stripes for rebelliousness. The diviner himself is punished if he performs one of the above. As it says, there shall not be found among you one who passes or practices divination. So yes, these kind of diviners, they tell you that if you pay them a certain amount, they can tell you what's going to happen. They can give you some ideas, what's luck and what's not luck. All of this is not allowed according to halacha. Number 8, who is a fortune... Hello? Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mute our participants because we're getting sound.
Sorry.
No problem. That's no problem. There we go. Fortune telling. So that starts from number 8. Who is a fortune teller? A person who tries to predict auspicious times using astrology and saying this day will be good, this day will be bad. It is appropriate to perform a particular task on a certain day. This year, this month will not be opportune for a particular matter. Okay, so if it's a stockbroker who's analyzing the market, no problem. He's basing himself on facts that he has analyzed. That doesn't mean they're guaranteed, but that's not magic. That's not sorcery. That's assessment of the business and the markets and the data and the indicators. But when a person is sucking it out his thumb as some kind of diviner, then that's not acceptable at all. So are we going to number 9? It is forbidden to tell fortunes. I remember as a child, I'm sure we all do, that often there were these like gypsy caravans that would show up, usually on an empty plot in a neighborhood. Remember that? And they'd have a big sign outside, fortune telling. So if you walked in there and paid a few rand, they would perhaps tell you a few things that could happen or should happen or would happen. All of that stuff is prohibited according to halacha. Doesn't matter whether it's real, doesn't matter whether it's not real, halacha does not allow it. It's forbidden to tell fortunes. I'm reading by number 9. This applies even though one doesn't perform a deed, but merely relates the falsehoods which the fools consider to be the words of truth and wisdom. By the way, a proper science, like a graphologist, a person who analyzes handwriting, no problem with that. That's acceptable because it can be done. It can be proven in social studies, in universities, that handwriting can tell us a lot about a person's strengths and weaknesses, character, etc. So that's not a problem. We're talking here about things that have no ground and base in any form of rationale. They're just plain gobbledygook. It's voodoo, it's nonsense. Anyone who performs a deed, and even if it's not nonsense, if it comes from a background of sorcery, that's also no good. Midway through 9, anyone who performs a deed because of an astrological calculation, arranging his work or journeys to fit a time suggested by astrologers, is liable for lashes. Leviticus states, do not tell fortunes. Also included in the scope of this prohibition is one who performs magic tricks and deludes those who observe him into thinking he performs wonders, although he is not doing so. He is liable for lashes. So what happens if you're a magician? What happens if that's how you make your living, but you're also a religious man? You want to observe the commandments of the Torah. Not a problem, but there needs to be a disclaimer. The people need to understand that the, quote, magic that you're doing is not really magic. It's more, I think today a lot of guys call themselves mentalists. In other words, it's mental delusion. It's like trick photography. It's very clear to the audience that what you are doing is not really sorcery or magic. It is some form of it's some form of trick. That's fine. Number 10, who is a person who casts spells? A person who chants incantations that have no meaning in people's speech or connotation, and imagines in foolish perception that these words have an effect. Such people will say, if you cast a particular spell on a snake or a scorpion, they will do no harm. If you cast a spell on a person, he won't be harmed. Some of them will hold a key or rock in their hands while they are talking or performing similar deeds. All of these are forbidden. And a person who casts spells is punished by lashes if he holds anything in his hand or performs an act while speaking or merely gesturing with a finger. And this comes from in the middle of that paragraph, there shall not be found among you one who casts spells. If the person merely spoke without moving the finger on his head or holding anything in his hand, blah, blah. It's just telling us all about the whole situation of spells and how they cast. Now, we know how many people have made money by trying to sell ornate things and trying to convince vulnerable people that they are some form of charm. You know that if you take this thing and you put it in your house, it's going to cause you good luck. If you put this stone in your pocket, you know, so many people have that. If you put this stone in your pocket or that bracelet on your hand, this will create charm and good luck. The halacha here is saying that we as Jews have to keep away from it, except for if it is something that our sages or our people have clearly said has a, how would you call it, a good omen to it. So for instance, there are people that walk around with the red string that comes from the tomb of the matriarch Rachel, Keva Rachel, no problem, because they have a source. There's a tradition in our own culture that creates some form of good omen. That's not a problem. That's not, God forbid, sorcery. But one should be careful of other stuff that one finds in the world. In general, there's a concept called a skula, which means it's like some kind of good omen, and many of them are innocent and allowed. So, towards the end of 10, all these deplorable incantations and strange names will not do harm, nor will they bring any benefit. If a person has been bitten by a scorpion or a snake, it is permitted to recite incantations over the bite, even on Shabbos. This was something they used to do in the days of old. They would whisper little incantations at the wound, you know, a little bit like a mom who's telling her child that fell down, you know, that naughty floor, naughty jungle gym, he caused you to be sore. And you know that old story where we watched our mom or granny slapping away at some piece of wood that hurt their little one. So again, it obviously has no meaning. It's a psychological thing. But he says that if it happened on Shabbos, then a person could literally whisper incantations even on Shabbos, because if it brings, how would you call it, some form of rest, some form of assurance to the victim, then it's fine, even though it doesn't help in any way. Number 12, a person who whispers an incantation over a wound and then recites verses from the Torah, recites a verse over a child so he won't be scared, or places Torah scroll tefillin over a baby, is considered to be a soothsayer, one who casts spells. Now this is very interesting. We'll unpack it further in a moment. Furthermore, such people are included among those who deny the Torah because they relate to the words of Torah as though they are cures for the body, when in fact they are cures for the soul. As it says in Proverbs, they shall be a life for your soul. It is, however, permitted for a healthy person to read verses from the Bible or chapters from Psalms. In the merits of reading them, he will be protected and he will be saved from difficulties and injury. So here you've got a bit of a gray area. It's a subtle thing. Because on the one hand, if someone's not well, if we find out that someone dear to us has got COVID-19 or anything else, the first thing we're going to do is pull out a Tehillim and start reciting Psalms. That is spiritual prayer. Nothing wrong, everything right. It's one of the main things we do. What he's saying over here is to start formulating actual ritualistic cures using the books or the words as instruments becomes a big problem, especially when we suck it out of our own thumb. So for instance, to go up to the person and recite the Tehillim over their sore hand or that kind of thing, that is a problem. But to recite it where you are or right next to their hospital bed or home bed or whatever, in other words, it's the attitude, it's the intention. If you realize that this is a spiritual vessel which can create a channel of blessing that will then transform into a physical blessing, please God, the person will get well. But the moment you're competing with the doctor and pushing him out the way with his medicine, because you want to bring a book there instead, and you want to put the book on top of the person's nose and press it down in some form of ritual, that's no good, because you are now taking it out of context. The best guideline in these things is there should be sources. You know, we all have bobomyces that we know about, that our grannies told us and our great grannies told us, and we all know the story of the airplane where the pilot, I think he heard that somebody was in trouble, and he said, "Is there a doctor on the plane, in the house or on the flight?" And an old Yiddish mama said, "I'm not a doctor, but I've got a flask of chicken soup." No problem if the chicken soup's going to help him feel better. But there are times where people have come up with different skulot or omens which don't have a grounding whatsoever, and they push them even though they are meaningless. That's a problem. How do you know if it's got meaning? Check if it comes from a great tzaddik. You know, for instance, South Africa has a crime problem. We need protection. Our sages are the ones who tell us clearly that a mezuzah is a clear omen for security, a clear omen for safety. It's important to check them, make sure they're hanging the right way. Some people even believe in keeping a mezuzah in a car. That's not an obligation, by the way. It doesn't say that you have to have one, but some people like to have one in the glove compartment. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said that if you keep a chitas, that's a book with the Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya inside the motor vehicle, that is a skula. That is an omen for safety in the motor vehicle. So that is something that comes from a good source. A great tzaddik, a holy person has told us that that is a thing to do. If we don't have a source for it, we saw it on Facebook, that somebody's friend told somebody else's friend that this is a thing to do, not necessarily is it healthy. Number 13, who is one who seeks information from the dead? A person starves himself, goes to sleep in a cemetery so that a deceased person will come to him in a dream and reply to questions. And he continues to explain all other ways that people utilize to, what are they called, I think in English, seances, where they try to communicate with the dead. This is not allowed according to Jewish law, whether it works, whether it doesn't work. In other words, whether it's so-called the real thing, or whether it isn't, it is not acceptable. And furthermore, it actually causes trouble. You know, it's a sad subject, but when we relate to those dear to us who have passed away the wrong way, when we do things that are not good for them, we actually can, chas v'shalom, we can, God forbid, cause distress to the soul of the dearly departed. So in fact, it's a very important thing to keep away from what one should not do with regard to the souls of the departed. So number 14, it's forbidden to inquire of a person who practices divination with an ov or yedoni. So this was a particular kind of idolatry where the ov or yedoni was utilized. There's different discussion about exactly what it was, but again, it was a form of divination where a particular kind of priest or whatever said that by doing certain things, he could figure out what was going to happen to you tomorrow or next week, or whether you were in for good luck or bad luck or health or the opposite. So all of this is something that one must not do. And in fact, in halacha number 15, it gets rather serious. Hamachashev chayev skila. The sorcerer must be condemned to execution by stoning. This applies when he commits a deed of sorcery. Again, I know you probably have heard this thousands of times. For those who think that we're walking around with a bag of stones and trying to stone everybody that disagrees with us, it's important to bear in mind that these punishments are mentioned here. They are serious. However, in the days of, let's say, a Torah-oriented society, a biblical society, it wasn't often at all that such punishments were carried out. They weren't carried out unless it was a particularly rebellious and suicidal person who wanted to check all the boxes and all the checks and balances and literally in a mashugana way cause himself to have no other option. That's when these kinds of punishments were carried out. They weren't carried out on a daily basis like some people might think, like some people might see done in other cults or lahavdil ways of worship. There is no daily stoning in Judaism. If, however, he deludes those who observe him into thinking he's performing an act, although he actually does not, he's given stripes for rebelliousness. In the second paragraph of 15, the reason that the prohibition against sorcery is stated, there shall not be found among you anybody. It is, however, prohibition which is punishable by execution, as the court states, do not allow a witch to live. Lashes are not administered for its violation. So a big problem with regard to any form of activity in sorcery. In order to get the punishment of death, one has to remember that in most cases in Jewish law, there had to be eidim, witnesses, hasra, proper, warning, ample warning. So once again, it was not a risk for people unless they were absolutely crazy and followed it through to the umpteenth extent. The punishments are recounted in halacha anyway to tell us how severely the Torah regards activity in these things. Now, here the Rambam says in the last halacha, in number 16, Udavarim ha'elu kulan divrei sheker b'chazav hain. All the above matters are falsehood and lies with which the original idolaters deceived the Gentile nations in order to lead after them. It's not fitting for Jews who are wise sages to be drawn into such emptiness or to consider that they have any value as implied. No black magic can be found among Jacob or occult arts within Israel. So yeah, there is a verse, one of the beautiful verses describing the Jewish people. I think it's one of the ones that the prophet Bilam said, that Lo nachash b'Yaakov v'lo kesem b'Yisrael. Jewish people don't need black magic. They don't need these kind of occult arts, because at the end of the day, our source of spirituality is in Hashem, in His Torah, and in mitzvahs. And there is a famous story of a lady that used to visit a particular psychic somewhere in the United States, who used to help her with spiritual dilemmas, a secular kind of situation, not a religious situation. And then the person became religious and started doing mitzvahs and studying Torah, and in fact, on occasions visited the Rebbe. And the story goes that she came to her psychic, and the one day the psychic said to her, "You have plugged into your real source. As a Jew, you belong there with your rabbi and your shul and your Torah and your mitzvahs, and there isn't much that I can do for you anymore." So at least that was an honest psychic that wasn't going to take more money from this poor lady, and rather let her go to shul and daven and do what has to be done. So that is the concept. We all look for spiritual guidance at times. We feel anxious, especially when the world finds itself in such bizarre circumstances as it is right now. It's only natural as human beings for us to feel vulnerable and look for answers. And we always have to remind ourselves that the answers for us as Jewish people are at home, in our home. And that home means in our Torah, in our mitzvahs, in our own tradition. We have the ultimate answers, spiritual power that is necessary for the better of ourselves and our families and the whole world. So he says in the next paragraph, whoever believes in occult arts of this nature and thinks they're true in words of wisdom, but are forbidden by the Torah, is foolish and feeble-minded. He is considered like women and children with underdeveloped intellects. So some harsh words there, strong views there. The masters of wisdom and those of perfect knowledge know with clear proof that all these crafts which the Torah forbade are not reflections of wisdom, but rather emptiness and vanity, which attracted the feeble-minded and caused them to abandon all the paths of truth. So we know that there is no shortage in this world of con men that want to con people, God forbid, out of their savings, con men that want to con people out of their energy and their time and everything. The world has no shortage, unfortunately, of such traps and such. And this is a perfect opportunity when people are feeling vulnerable and they don't know what's going to happen. When this is a perfect opportunity for so-called con people to march in and say, "I've got the answers, just give me a little bit of money and I can sort it out." And sadly, very, very sadly, some of these people will pose as rabbis too, as religious people. That's very sad, but it is true. In Israel and other places, there are people who will tell you that if you pay them money, they can solve your problems. And unfortunately and sadly, they sometimes look religious or they look like rabbis. It's not so. It's a con. There is no such thing that a person should have to charge another person, God forbid, or steal or take away what's theirs under the false pretenses that they can provide relief and happiness and all these kind of things. But rather what we all know is if we do what we have to do and we give tzedakah and we're good people and whatever, then please God, we will merit Hashem's blessings. So the last lines of the Rambam in Hebrew first, because of this the Torah said, when the Torah warned about all these vanities, it advised and said in Deuteronomy chapter 18, and this is a powerful verse, Tamim tiyeh Hashem elikecha, you should be of perfect faith with God your Lord. Be a solid citizen, follow the laws to the best of our sincere ability. We know we're not perfect, and that is the way that we will achieve the luck, so to speak, that we need to achieve, not by doing funny things and getting involved in bizarre practices. And hopefully that should bring lots of bracha. So we'll close it over there. That's 1:33. If anybody would like to chat, with the greatest of pleasure. Wishing everybody a great day till we see each other.
Rabbi, question.
Yes.
you talked just a few moments ago about rabbis who are offering cures and offering success. The names of the individuals that we've all seen are in fact, some of them viewed in very high positions in the rabbinate on a worldly basis. And yet they are promising, just give us money and you'll have children, give us money and your health will be restored. This is being done really on an ongoing basis. And I've always been an uncomfortable situation with that. I've got no problem giving tzedakah, that's obviously so. I have a worry about buying a blessing, which is really what they're offering.
So I think it's a very subtle and gray area, and that's why one has to assess it properly. If the person is telling you that giving tzedakah, and not necessarily to them, because that's another way of working it out. If a person, a rabbi or any person says to you that giving tzedakah is going to bring about blessing and great spiritual rewards, that's true. It says it in many places. If they're even going to suggest, without creating too much pressure and without being overbearing or almost a con, God forbid, if they're going to create, if they're going to try and, how would you call it, lobby you in the direction of places that need that tzedakah, even that you could still say is you're an adult and you can decide whether that's where you would like to contribute or you want to contribute somewhere else. But there are cases that you can see are clearly cons. In other words, we're vulnerable people. Sometimes single mothers that don't have much money or people who don't have a lot of funds almost feel like they have to so-called pay their way in a certain kind of situation. And if not, this person, how would you call it, is manipulating their vulnerable emotions, and they may give up on funds that they actually need for their own priorities. And that's, so there's a subtle difference. There's a subtle difference between saying that a new good pair of tefillin is an omen for great blessing, and saying that you have to buy it from me, and it has to be like this, and even if you don't have any other funds, this is what you have to do right now. One has to unpack the exact presentation of the of how it's being offered or being done, and that's the big difference. That on the one hand, it's true. Like you could see, for instance, there are ads in a lot of the Torah magazines in the world that will say that if you give tzedakah to Kupat Ta'ir, to this organization that keeps everybody going, etc., it will bring you and your family and everybody great blessing. There's nothing wrong with that because it's true. It's absolutely true. But you could choose to give it to the Chevra Kadisha in South Africa. And if they're going to tell you that the blessing over here is more than the blessing over there, that's where the warning bells start. Why would my, as long as it's a genuine organization that's truly looking after the poor, governed well, it shouldn't make a difference whether it is mine or his or another one. So the objectivity, and again, it's a little bit like marketing in business. A salesman's entitled to sell, and he's entitled to tell you what's good about his product and to market it to the best of his ability, but he can cross certain lines where he might already be going, how would you call it, into an overbearing level of making you feel that you're at terrible risk if you don't buy his product. And he might notice that, or let's say he might prey on somebody who's not making an informed decision. And in the meantime, what's discovered later is that they just were too frightened to say no or coerced into it. So it's, people are human beings. It doesn't matter whether they're so-called religious Jews or not. They have to follow a moral standard.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a gray area.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Didn't you have a problem here in South Africa a few years back with one of these rabbis? He had a whole troop of people following him around. And I think at the moment he's sitting in jail in Israel.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that, and I'd rather not. But yes, that's an example of there are such things. You see, the thing is that people, by nature, we human beings are vulnerable. And, vulnerability can cause trouble in any sphere. Like, in America, you've had a whole campaign in the last few months about police brutality. But the truth of the matter is bad people find their way into all professions. Police are not necessarily going to get a worse element than doctors and lawyers and rabbis, and sadly, rabbis.
They're not bad people among lawyers, Rabbi. I don't know where you get that.
I put rabbis in too, Andrew, so we're on even territory. But it's the sad reality. The true reality is that human nature brings the devious folk into all professions, and each profession has, how do you call it, the right tools for the wrong people. Yeah.
Thanks, Rabbi.
A pleasure.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks very much, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rabbi.
everyone.
Thanks.
Okay.
Rabbi,
care.
I have
Yes.
to say something that
Thanks,
upsets me.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi,
Certainly. Yes. Hello?
when he said these traps of sorcery, emptiness, and like women and children who have undeveloped intellects, that really upset me. I mean, does he mean that about all women and children?
So I think Rabbi Chaikin once explained it well on one of the previous Rambam things. I think that there was a day and age when women were simply less involved on the intellectual side of study and that. And I think it comes very much from that day and age. There was the society was different once upon a time, where the feeling was that women ran so-called the home front. It's not that it's not important. And yes, there are many sources that women were discouraged from study, and thank God that's been one of the positive changes that's occurred. And some people might think that it's just a change of modernity, that as the world gets more modern, it realizes that ancient stuff was a problem. But the truth is, if you look in the mystical sciences, God created the world with a masculine and feminine dimension, which are two different elements. And one of the things that they say, I mean, this is a share for its own time, is as we move closer to the era of Mashiach, the dominance of the masculine element becomes less and less important. In other words, because women represent nature and reality more so than men do, so it has already been predicted many years ago that one of the things that will occur in the improving world coming to redemption, to Mashiach, is that all the feminine elements of creation will increase in their importance as we get closer to the Geula. And that means intellectually, academically, and all of that, it will play out as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I hoped
Okay.
it would be like that. that would be your explanation.
Yeah.
My wife tells me that all the time.
Sorry? Your wife told you that all the time.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Cheers,
A
everyone.
pleasure. A pleasure. Take
Very
care.
interesting. Very, very
Thank you.
interesting. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
could have
Take
spent
care.
hours on this.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. That's a big subject. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Take
Rabbi.
care. Have a
Yes,
wonderful day,
Rabbi.
everybody. Bye.